Pastor Life podcast from Pinnacle Leadership Associates. My name is Rhonda Blevins. I'm the pastor of Chapel by the Sea in Clearwater Beach, Florida. I'm here as always with my friend and partner, David Brown. David, introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm David Brown. I'm the pastor of the Welcome Table in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and I'm a Pinnacle associate. And I'm also the faithful co-host with Rhonda Blevins of this podcast. We're glad that you're all listening in, and we are in season 6, episode 4 of Pastor Life podcast.
That's right. That's right. Holy Experiments Strategy for Joining God's Mission in the World. Our presenter, our content provider for this season is none other than David Brown. And David, we kind of started theologically and theoretically, I feel like, with session 1, episode 1. We kind of moved in then last episode into models for strategy. And I think today you're going to be presenting another model. Is that right?
Yeah, we're kind of at the heart of this series, and we're diving into some different sorts of models or methodologies for thinking strategically and living strategically inside of our churches. And so last week we really talked about some high-level questions, the strategic choice cascade, that really might help us to be grounded in our aspiration or our mission, and to watch how that cascades or plays out over different aspects of our life together as churches. And so it was really high level, bigger picture, deep, foundational kind of questions. Whereas today, we're going to look at a methodology that comes from design thinking, and we can talk a little bit about design thinking, and then this particular model or method called the Sailboat Exercise.
Sailboat Exercise. I'll have to tell you about my one and only sailing experience, maybe.
All right. Sounds like
I
there's
hope
a
this
story
exercise
there.
goes better than my sailing experience went.
That's funny. Funny.
Well, let's get started with episode 4 of season 6 of Pastor Life podcast, the Sailboat Exercise. How do you want to start, David?
Well, I guess maybe let's talk briefly about design thinking. And I'm not an expert on this, but I'll post a lot of information about design thinking in the show notes, which are also becoming a toolkit for pastors and other church leaders to use as they try to think a little more intentionally and strategically. So that's probably the place to start.
Okay. Design thinking. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm embarrassed. I don't know what that is.
Yeah. So
what is that?
Yeah. So design thinking is this, way of approaching problems or design that really, began in the business world. A guy named Tim Brown and a company called IDEO.
Okay.
And then it was sort of grounded in some academic thought and research. And again, we'll post some of this in the notes. But the thought with design thinking is that when you are trying to solve a problem, you begin with the end users or the stakeholders, and you kind of work backward to a potential solution. And so it really begins, in a sense, with empathy and trying to put yourself into the shoes of the stakeholders or the participants, the people who will be experiencing whatever it is that is the product that you are offering. Okay. So kind of like last week, there's some theological translation that has to happen with that.
Sure.
But I would say the keys here are beginning with empathy, and then paying attention to all the people who are invested and who are stakeholders in your mission, vision, life as a congregation, and then thinking about problems that you're facing through that lens.
Okay. So let's say, I think last episode I mentioned, my church and sort of a really small children's ministry. So the problem is lack of participation in children's programs and ministries by children and their parents. And so the end user would be the children.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And probably the parents as well. So starting with empathy towards the children.
Mm-hmm.
My kid says That's boring, right? So start with that, have empathy for his boredom and build from there. Is that
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
okay?
and to think about what that person um, might be feeling, thinking, experiencing in life, and what they bring to the experience as well. And so I think different stakeholders in that equation, might be children, parents, might be staff members who provide
Hmm.
the programming, other volunteers within the church community who take part in leadership. And so really it's about kind of mapping out each of the stakeholders and then trying to approach the problem with their interests in mind.
Okay. Yeah, I get that. That's easy enough.
Yeah. So there are all sorts of different models or tools or resources that can be brought to bear. And there are actually places you can go online that will just give you lists of different exercises or activities that kind of come out of a design thinking mindset or approach.
Okay.
And so one of those that I've used quite a bit with churches and even with our own Pinnacle team has been this sailboat exercise. And I think we'll
Okay. Yeah.
dive a little deeper into it. And I think differently from last week, this is an opportunity if there is a front of mind problem or challenge that you have with your organization, your church, or listeners who are listening in. You might bring a real immediate front burner, front of mind kind of issue or problem, and then use one of these design experiments like the sailboat exercise to bring some clarity or develop some thoughts around potential solutions.
Okay. All right. So tell us about the sailboat exercise, and I'll
Yeah.
refrain from telling you my sailboat experience.
We'll have to save that for another time. So with the sailboat exercise, I tend to use a whiteboard, or in the virtual world, I've got a set of slides that I can use if this is a Zoom conversation. But it works really well in a room, conference room, something like that, fellowship hall with a whiteboard up front. And you actually use an image to begin this exercise. So you invite the people who are the stakeholders gathered in that room to think about the problem that they're facing, the situation that's in front of them, to think about themselves as a sailboat out on the water. And there's an island in the distance. And that island in the distance is a potential positive solution to whatever problem they are facing. And so you sort of set the context for that, and in whatever skill level you have with a not a Sharpie. Don't use a Sharpie on the whiteboard, but with a expo marker or a erasable marker, dry erase marker, even sketch this out. Here's the boat, nice little sail on it. Here's the island, nice little palm tree on it, and here's the water in between. So you've got that image in your mind. The first question that you would ask is, who's in the boat? So if we're beginning with empathy, we're beginning with stakeholders, the first question is, who's in the boat? And so as a group, you collectively begin describing who is it that's in the boat. So with your children's ministry, who are the folks that are in the boat? Or who are the people that that you want to be a part of the conversation, who have something at stake?
Okay. So, sorry. Can we keep going with my example?
Let's
Okay,
keep
so
going.
we've got children in the boat, the children who have been kind of loosely connected perhaps to the church.
Yep.
Children outside the church who live near the church, maybe?
Yeah.
Those parents, those interested volunteers. Me, am I in the boat?
Yeah, I think you are in the boat, right?
Other staff members.
Right.
Okay. All right. So anybody else in the boat with that?
So the first step would be to try to think about all the different people who are there, and to begin describing them and thinking about what they might be feeling or experiencing, what they might need, the different ways that they might have something at stake in this problem or challenge. So beginning there, and sometimes that's just helpful to map out for somebody who might be in the boat, but not really thinking about the other people who are also in the boat.
Right.
Or there might be stakeholders who aren't obvious at first blush. There might
Okay.
be a stakeholder group, like maybe it's the children who live in the surrounding neighborhood. And the first thought of most of the people who are already a part of your congregation might be on the children who are there, or the
Right.
families who are already there. And so there might be kind of a hidden constituency of stakeholders.
Yeah, I recently had a conversation with another local pastor that, possibly we could join forces.
Mm-hmm.
So would that person
Yeah.
and maybe that church and their volunteer workers be in the boat with us?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
I
so
think so.
partners possibly.
Yeah, I think anyone that you would want to be either including in the conversation or at a minimum paying attention to as the conversation moves forward.
Okay, yeah, all right.
Yeah. So once you kind of have an idea of who's in the boat, then the next step would be kind of to provide some sort of definition about the island. So
Okay.
what is it that we are hoping to move toward? And often I will work with a group to try to phrase their island in terms of sort of a projected vision for the future, but then maybe kind of wrapped into a how might we question. So
Right. Okay.
maybe the island is something about the type of youth or children's ministry that you imagine. This is what a vitalized ministry with children and their families would look like.
Well, it looks like it looked back in the 50s, David, of course.
Is that right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We had lots of children back then. Why don't we have as many children now, David?
Right. So here's a good opportunity to help your congregation to create maybe a different definition of what that potential future of ministry with children and families looks like.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So maybe the question is something like, how might we reimagine a children's ministry that meets the needs of children and families within our church and community, and develops them into young disciples? Yeah, I don't know.
I like it.
So what you're hoping to do is to create an island that, the island might not be the final destination, but the island might be the thing that draws you the next step down the road.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So that question, how might we question, to me kind of opens up possibilities and gets the conversation started. And design thinking would prefer a how might we question to a how should we, or even to a how can we. How might we is an invitational way to frame that question, and it's sort of a non-judgmental way to frame that question.
It opens up possibilities.
Right. And I think in a theological context, this is a model that developed completely outside of a theological context. But to me, how might we is a really powerful question for Christians to ask, because it opens us to all the possibilities in, the mind of God and the hopes of God for us in the world.
That's right. It's also a good coaching question. You and I do coaching with clergy, and it's a great coaching question.
Yep.
How might you take that next step?
Yeah, absolutely.
It opens up. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think these first two pieces of the picture for the sailboat exercise are pretty important. Figuring out who's on the boat, figuring out what are the voices that we need to be listening to, people we're paying attention to, and then what is the true nature of the challenge that is ahead of us? What is the best way we can articulate the island to which we're moving? So I would tend to spend maybe a little more time on these early parts of the exercise. And then, hopefully you're set up well for the next couple things we're going to talk about.
Okay. Can I stop and ask a sort of procedural question with it? How many people can you do this exercise with?
Yeah, so I would say probably the most people that I've done that, probably our Pinnacle team has been the most people that I've done this with. And it was a virtual meeting, which had its
Right.
own challenges as well. But that was probably 16 to 20 people. I would say it probably works best with a church staff or leadership team,
Okay.
maybe 10 people or fewer,
Okay.
8 to 10 people. Um, and then I think what you learn from the process, then you could take on to a larger group. But I think just the mechanics of trying to work this out and sketch it out on a whiteboard and give everybody the opportunity to chime in, I think 8 to 10 people is kind of a max.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thanks for letting me chase that
Yeah,
rabbit for a second.
for
All
sure.
right. So we've now considered what the island might look like.
Yeah,
Not should, but might.
not should, but might.
All right.
Um,
Next step.
yeah, so the way that I think about this when I'm leading it is that we're just building out this picture that's a literal picture on the whiteboard or in the slide deck.
Sure.
And so you've started with the boat, you've got the island, and you've got the water that's separating them from one another, right?
Okay.
And so what our goal is to use this little thought experiment to imagine what some next positive steps would be to move the boat toward the island.
Okay.
And so we're going to start building out this picture with the winds that are in our sails and the anchors that hold us back.
Okay. Yeah.
So you've got winds in the sails, and you can draw them in on your little illustration. And I think the visual piece of this really kind of helps people to think differently than if you were just sitting around a table and
it's
trying to have
also
a conversation.
playful.
Yeah, I agree.
It's
Right.
lighthearted and not so heavy. So yeah, I
Right.
like it. Okay. So the winds and the sails,
winds and
hopefully
the
there is some
sails
wind.
and the anchors that are holding us back. So
Right.
the way to think about both of these is that there are factors, both internal and external, to our congregation or to the organization that you're thinking about. There are factors, both internal and external, both in our control and outside of our control, that affect how well we're able to make progress toward the island. And so we want to take some time to think about those things. So the winds in the sail might be internal winds that are propelling us toward the goal. These would be strengths or qualities about our congregation and its people that are propelling us toward. They're giving us the momentum or resources we need. They might also be factors outside in the world, like there are many young families moving to our community. So the potential number of children within a radius of the church is growing. That would be a potential wind in the sail. You don't control it, but it's something that has the potential to give added momentum toward the island.
Okay. Yeah.
And similar on the anchors. So anchors could be things that are in our control. We're locked in a mindset about what children's ministry was 30 years ago, and it's holding us back. We don't have many children who are already present. We've got sort of a shrinking number of kids and young families who are present. So we don't have a lot of institutional momentum. But it might also be an external factor. Families are busy with any number of other commitments.
At my church, it's sailing.
Right. They're busy with any number of other commitments, of which church is one commitment, potentially. So there could be external factors that are anchors as well. So mapping out, and actually listing either up on the board or writing down, here are any number of winds in the sail, and here are any number of anchors that are holding us back.
Okay. This part reminds me a little bit of the old SWOT.
Yeah, the SWOT analysis.
SWOT. Yeah. It's strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This is sort of strength and weakness part of that, right?
Yep. Well, and
All
it
right.
really kind of folds in the opportunities and threats too, because the opportunities and threats are the external pieces, and the strengths and
That's right.
weaknesses are
Yeah.
the internal pieces. So it's sort of a, rather than just having your little quadrant chart on the board when you
Uh-huh.
would be doing a SWOT analysis, this is sort of I think, a more visual way of asking a similar
Yeah. Yeah.
question.
Yeah. And again, more playful, and
Yeah.
especially I can see, poking fun at somebody for their terrible drawings, and
Right. Right. Right.
not you, of course.
No,
I'm sure your
that
drawings
typically
are
happens
beautiful.
for me. Yeah, that's typically the way that it's done. Well, and I would just say that if there's somebody who's listening out there and who's thinking, "Hey, this seems like a great idea, but I'm terrible at drawing things on a whiteboard." Well, it's fine. It's really okay. The
Right.
key is, draw a triangle for the sail. Draw a little half moon for the boat. It's
Yeah.
okay. Draw a
How hard can
circle
that
for the
be? Right.
island with a little stick tree coming out of it. The key, I think, is cultivating that sense of, I think what you've accurately called it is playfulness, cultivating this
Hmm.
sense of, we're not getting bogged down by the challenges of the problem, because we've got a creative way to engage it.
Yeah. I also don't want to say that it's trite, though, because like when we did it with our Pinnacle team, there was some really deep conversation.
Yeah.
I think especially around the wind in the sails and the anchors.
Right.
We had
Yeah.
some really good conversation around that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And depending on how much time I have to work with a group, and sometimes this takes multiple sessions to work through. But
yeah.
when I was first introduced to this method, one of the things that we did was to use this idea, and I think this actually comes from uh, well, I'll think of it and I'll drop it in the notes. But
Okay.
this comes from some other source, and it's the
Some other source
some
besides
other
David's
source that
brain.
we'll note below.
All
But
right.
asking the 5 whys, and what we would do is to take one or two of the anchors, maybe the most powerful or the heaviest anchor. So let's say that in
Yeah.
your case, this anchor is our past remembering of children's ministry, and
Hmm.
it's a weighty anchor. We've got to sort of figure it out in order to release it and move forward. And
Hmm.
so the 5 whys is imagining that you're a toddler, whose favorite question is to ask why. And when a toddler and a parent are having a discussion about something, you give your first answer back to the toddler, and their next question is again why,
Why?
and you elaborate a little bit more, give a few more details, and they come back with why.
Why?
And so you might take the we're weighed down by past perceptions of what children's ministry looks like. Well, why? And then your people, whoever you're leading this with, will give their first stab at why. And
Hmm.
and then whatever that first stab is, then you come back with, well, why? And so
Okay.
gradually you kind of go a layer deeper. And so with this critical anchor, or this critical thing that's holding you back, you're really interrogating it and trying to get down to
Hmm.
the root. Why are we holding on to an outdated model and believing that just applying a model that worked in the past is going to be the key to success in the future? And
Right.
you're helping to kind of dismantle that and get down to the root of it.
Yeah. So you've just presented a model within a model
A
here.
model within a model. So
Wow.
you could use the 5 whys to
Yeah.
sort of interrogate that. The
All right. So I
key.
know who's in the boat. Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yep. No, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Well, okay. I'm just kind of recapping. I know who I've got in the boat, and I've got some idea, some what the island looks like, what might the island be, and some wind in the sails, some anchors that are holding us back. So what's next?
Yeah. So what's next is to begin thinking of some potential solutions,
Okay.
some potential answers to that how might we question. So given what we've mapped out here on the board, what are some potential ways that we might strategically try to move toward the island? And so this is sort of where you would be doing brainstorming or divergent thinking. This is kind
Yeah.
of what are all the
Innovation.
different ways that we might move toward the island. And
Mhm.
if I was in a room full of people doing this is where I might have a stack of sticky notes and
Okay.
pass around sticky notes to everybody and say, come up with your 5 best ideas for moving the boat toward the island.
Okay.
And then every person would write down their 5 and come stick it up on the board. And
Mhm.
we'd try to come up with some common themes or kind of organize the sticky notes into categories. And it's a way to begin thinking about concrete ways to make progress toward the island, given all the
Okay. Yeah.
situations that we've just described.
Right. So some of those ideas are going to be good, and we know that some of those ideas are not going to be good.
Yes.
So then what? So you got all these
Yeah.
ideas, and they're all on the
Yeah.
board, and some are great, and some are terrible.
Yeah.
And you say, "God bless you for that idea."
Yeah, that's right.
So how do you get to the best of the ideas that are on the
Yeah.
board?
So I think you can do a couple things. You could just see how many sticky notes ended up in each category and sort of
Mm-hmm.
assume that the more sticky notes in one general thought bubble gives weight to that one. You could also have an extra layer in here, and you could pass around little colored dots. I've got
The
a big
dots,
bag of
yes.
these. So you could have people sort of indicate. Once you've kind of grouped some together, which one of these do you think are most likely going to be effective?
Yeah.
The other thing that I like to do at this point too is to let's say you've got 6 or 8 ideas that seem plausible and seem like they have a potential of making progress of the boat toward the island.
Mm-hmm.
Then what you can do is you can do one of those little 2-axis charts where you're thinking about the amount of effort and the amount of payoff.
Okay.
So, is this a low investment
Mm-hmm.
solution with high impact? So that would be kind of the idea of a low hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm.
If it's low intensity but high payout, then that's probably something you want to go ahead and start putting into practice.
Right.
There might be other things that are, high investment but also high payoff.
Right.
High investment, but they're going to be really effective. It might be one of the most effective ways to make progress toward the island, but it's going to
Hmm.
take time and energy. And so you want to kind of know that. There might
Yeah.
be other things that are, lower investment, but also lower effectiveness, lower payoff.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those might be worth
Yeah.
doing, but some of them might not be.
Sure.
And then, of course, there's also the possibility that something is high investment, but low payoff, low projected payoff.
Yeah.
And so if you can identify those early, then you can maybe go ahead and pull them off the table
Yeah.
rather than
That's good.
spending a lot of time and energy for something that you don't imagine will have much of a payoff.
I see. Right. That's great.
Yeah.
So at the end of that, you've got 2 or 3 probably pretty worthy ideas,
Yeah,
right?
you've got some potential pathways to chart the course for the sailboat
Yeah.
toward the island, right?
And so then you can lead your team to decide whether to try 1, 2, or 3 ideas,
Yep.
right?
Yep. What does it look like to implement these things? How do we know if they're succeeding or not?
Next steps, action items, etc.
That's right, for sure.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
one
All right.
more interesting piece to the sailboat puzzle, and
Okay.
I haven't always done it, but sometimes it's interesting to do. And so you've got this sailboat experiment that we've kind of painted the big picture of,
Mm-hmm.
and we've walked kind of all the way through it. And like you said, when you get to that point of some potential solutions, then there are X number of other processes you might run on those to
Yep.
move them toward implementation. But if people are getting hung up or stuck somewhere along the way, maybe it's even they're getting hung up on the how might we question that kind of directs us toward the island. an interesting thought experiment is to shift this from the sailboat experiment to the pirate experiment.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. And so with the pirate experiment, you do the same thing. You go around the room and you say, if you were trying to completely subvert and turn away the sailboat from the island, what would you do? How might we completely disrupt this thing that we want to happen? And it's sort of doing that negative or that converse. It's sort of like I've heard of business consultants that'll ask a leadership team, what would you do if you were your competitor? What would you do to kill your company, to put yourself out of business?
Okay.
And just that thought experiment of trying to imagine the opposite thing that you would want to happen, or the opposite outcome from which you're trying to move the boat toward. It can give you some insight, or it can break through a wall if a group is kind of getting stuck. So, so if you need it, pull out the pirate experiment in the middle.
All right. Pull out the pirate.
Yep.
All right. I think, I mean, it sounds simple enough. And what's interesting about this season and the models you're presenting is people listening don't have to hire a consultant now because they've got all these tools in their tool belt.
That's right. We'll give them a bunch of tools, and hopefully we won't put Pinnacle out of business in doing so. Right.
Right. Yeah. No, these are really helpful tools and simple enough. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I appreciate you sharing these. What else would you say before we close out this episode?
Yeah, I like we said last week in the last session, I hope the strategic choice cascade gave people some questions they can pull out of their pocket or ask when they're trying to think about those foundational questions. I hope the sailboat exercise is something that you might pull out and try when you've got a pressing problem that's just right in front of you and you need to think more deeply about it. Be more intentional about how you're approaching it. So next session, we'll come back with another model or method, and then we'll maybe have a session or two to kind of wrap things up after that.
That sounds great. I'm loving this season. Thank you so much for sharing this great content. You can always catch us on our website. That's pinlead.com. PINNLEAD.com. That's where you can find show notes. You can also find this toolkit that David will be putting together, which is a great gift and a great gift for us pastors. What else, David? What have I forgotten to tell our listeners?
I think that's it until next week. So all you pirates out there, put pirates and pastors, put this to work in your ministry and practice.
Arr.